Aoi entered her house looking extremely upset. She immediately burst into tears because her boyfriend had turned her down, leaving her heartbroken and emotionally devastated. While she was crying, her stepbrother, Soichiro, came over and remarked that it seemed she had been dumped once again. He then assumed that the person responsible was her boyfriend, Sake. Aoi defended Sake, insisting that it was not his fault at all. She complained that Soichiro was being too cold toward her and told him that he should have comforted her instead of making such remarks during such a painful moment. In response, Soichiro reminded her that they were only step-siblings before casually walking away and leaving her alone. Feeling even more hurt by his indifferent attitude, Aoi went into Soichiro's room and continued crying. She kept thinking about how cold and uncaring his response had been while also telling herself that she somehow had to win her boyfriend back. As she sat there in tears, she suddenly noticed a strange device lying on the table beside an instruction manual. Out of curiosity, she picked it up and began reading it. After reading the manual, she realized that the device was called the hypnosis light. The instructions stated that anyone affected by its light would remain hypnotized for approximately 2 to 3 days. She found it surprising because, although Soichiro always acted calm and composed, she never expected him to own such an unusual device. She quickly concluded that it most likely belonged to him. Just then, Soichiro opened the door and immediately questioned why she was inside his room. He mentioned that he had just finished taking a shower and told her that she should leave his room immediately. Instead of answering directly, Aoi commented that his body was so muscular because he regularly played baseball. Believing that she was acting strangely, Soichiro teased her by asking if she was drunk and told her not to take out her frustration on him simply because she had been rejected. As Aoi looked at the hypnosis light in her hands, she wondered whether she should test it on him. Acting on impulse, she activated the device and pointed it toward Soichiro. After using it, she complained that he should have comforted her because she was heartbroken instead of treating her so coldly. A few moments later, she realized that the hypnosis light had actually worked. Under its influence, Soichiro walked toward her, sincerely apologized, and embraced her. He admitted that it was not a joke, and said that he was genuinely sorry because he had failed to realize how much pain she had been going through. He promised that he would comfort and support her from that moment onward. Satisfied with his response, Aoi told him that if he truly wanted to comfort her, he could start by giving her a massage so that she could relax. Without hesitation, Soichiro agreed and began gently massaging her. While doing so, he found himself wondering whether his sudden change in behavior and emotions was somehow being caused by the mysterious hypnosis light. Soichiro reflected on everything that had happened and realized that he was merely acting in front of Aoi. He thought to himself that he had purchased the hypnosis light online one night while feeling anxious and unable to sleep. Deep down, he knew the device was nothing more than a useless gadget, but after seeing how seriously Aoi believed in it, he felt too embarrassed to reveal the truth. Instead, he decided to continue pretending that the device had actually hypnotized him, while Aoi remained completely convinced that it was genuinely working. As he continued giving her a massage, Soichiro found himself thinking that he was honestly enjoying spending time with her. He also realized that Aoi had always shown her vulnerable side only in front of him, yet she probably had no idea about the feelings he secretly harbored for her. Meanwhile, Aoi asked him to massage her shoulders more carefully and properly. While doing so, Soichiro commented that her muscles felt extremely sore, which was why he was focusing on those areas. He then convinced himself that since Aoi believed he was under the influence of hypnosis, it was perfectly fine for him to continue playing along with the act. A little later, Soichiro suggested that they should start a back workout on a regular basis. He explained that hitting back together would help her relax and would also allow him to comfort and support her whenever she felt down. Although both of them hesitated at first, they eventually agreed to begin training together. After they finished their gym sesh, Soichiro went to bed. Before falling asleep, he reassured himself that as long as he continued pretending to be hypnotized, everything would be fine and no one would discover the truth. The following morning, Soichiro woke up and walked out of his room. He found Aoi already sitting at the dining table waiting for breakfast. At that moment, memories of the previous night's stretching session flashed through his mind. He suddenly remembered that their parents were away on a trip, and because he had spent the entire night thinking about everything that had happened, he had barely managed to sleep. Still feeling half asleep, he absent-mindedly greeted Aoi with a cheerful morning greeting. The moment the words left his mouth, Soichiro realized his mistake. He thought that he should have behaved normally instead of greeting her so warmly because, according to the act, he was supposed to be under the influence of the hypnosis light. Meanwhile, Aoi was equally surprised. She quietly thought that Soichiro had not greeted her properly since they were in middle school, yet now he was suddenly wishing her good morning with such kindness. This only convinced her even more that the hypnosis light was still affecting him. Wanting to test whether the hypnosis was still active, Aoi instructed him to turn around and spin 3 times. Without questioning her request, Soichiro obediently followed her instructions and completed the 3 turns. Watching him do exactly as she had asked, Aoi remembered that the instruction manual had stated that the hypnosis would remain effective for 2 to 3 days. She happily concluded that the device was still working exactly as described. After finishing the small test, Soichiro smiled and assured Aoi that he would comfort her again that day whenever she needed him. Internally, however, he wondered how much more confused she was going to become if he continued pretending that the hypnosis was real. Aoi then admitted that perhaps it would be better if they did not continue working out together. Curious about her sudden hesitation, Soichiro asked whether there was anything wrong with ITR. After talking for a while, the awkwardness between them gradually disappeared, and the two eventually decided to continue their private PT session together once again. After that, Soichiro went out to play soccer. While practicing on the field, his mind kept wandering back to Aoi, and he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few days. He quietly thought to himself that Aoi had always been a kind and gentle girl who had gradually become even closer to him than the rest of his own family. Back then, when they were younger, he had never been able to understand the difference between the affection he felt for a family member and the feelings someone could develop for a person of the opposite gender. However, as he entered his rebellious phase and continued growing older, those emotions became increasingly confusing. He no longer knew how he was supposed to behave around her, and because of that confusion, the cheerful relationship they once shared had slowly disappeared. They hardly laughed together anymore, and every conversation between them felt awkward and distant. Deep inside his heart, he admitted that he genuinely liked Aoi, and that he had never hated her. However, he also believed that if they ever crossed the invisible boundary that existed between them, they would no longer be able to continue living together as step-siblings. Remembering the instructions written in the Hypnosis Lights manual, he recalled that its effects were supposed to last only 2 to 3 days. Therefore, once that period came to an end, he decided that they should simply pretend that everything had returned to normal and continue living their ordinary lives as if nothing unusual had ever happened. Convincing himself that this was the best possible decision, he resolved that he would definitely do exactly that. Later that evening, Soichiro returned home after finishing his practice. The moment he stepped inside the house, he immediately noticed the strong smell of alcohol spreading throughout the room. He instantly assumed that Aoi must have been drinking again. Before approaching her, he reminded himself that he needed to stay calm and act completely natural in front of her, so that she would not suspect anything. He then walked toward her room and opened the door while commenting that she should not have gotten drunk so early in the day. He even remarked that this kind of behavior was probably one of the reasons why her boyfriend had broken up with her. As he entered the room, he saw Aoi lying on the bed. Feeling slightly concerned, he asked whether she was all right. After taking a closer look, he quickly realized that she was completely drunk and barely aware of her surroundings. Worried about her condition, he gently told her that she should simply go to sleep and get some proper rest instead of exhausting herself any further. However, Aoi stubbornly refused. She insisted that she still wanted to perform their PT lesson together despite being intoxicated. Seeing how determined she was, Soichiro hesitated for a brief moment before eventually agreeing to accompany her. The following morning, Soichiro woke up and began getting ready for school. As he prepared himself, he kept thinking that he had barely managed to sleep the previous night because too many thoughts had been running through his mind. He also believed that, regardless of what happened next, things between him and Aoi were bound to become awkward from now on. While walking through the house, he unexpectedly bumped into Aoi. At that moment, he quietly thought that awkward encounters like this would probably happen much more often in the future. Aoi immediately apologized to him and admitted that she had been extremely drunk the previous night. She explained that she could barely remember anything that had happened and worried that she might have caused him unnecessary trouble. She further confessed that she had been so exhausted that she had fallen asleep exactly where she already was, instead of making her way to her own room. Trying to brush the matter aside, Soichiro jokingly complained that she always caused him so much trouble. He then teased her by saying that if she continued drinking so much beer, she would eventually gain weight. His teasing immediately irritated Aoi, and before long, the two of them found themselves arguing once again. After their brief quarrel, Soichiro finally left the house while quietly thinking that perhaps it was actually a good thing that Aoi could not remember everything that had happened during the previous night. Meanwhile, inside the house, Aoi remained seated all by herself while gently holding the hypnosis light in her hands. She stared silently at the strange device before sadly realizing that its effects had finally worn off. She quietly wished that she could have continued using it for a little while longer. Although she knew very well that relying on the hypnosis light had been unfair and could even be considered cheating, she could not help feeling that way. Deep inside her heart, she believed that the only reason she felt so reluctant to let its effects end was because Soichiro had become someone incredibly precious and important to her. After that, Soichiro continued walking toward his school while reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few days. As he walked, he quietly thought to himself that it had already been 3 days since the incident with the hypnosis light. He believed that Aoi was completely convinced that all of his unusual behavior had merely been the result of the hypnosis light's effects. Since she now believed that the hypnosis had worn off, she had started acting completely normal around him, behaving as though nothing unusual had ever happened between them. Seeing her attitude, Soichiro decided that he also had no choice but to follow her lead and pretend that he did not remember anything either. Even though he tried to convince himself that this was probably the best solution, a question continued to trouble his mind. He wondered whether he would truly be able to return to living the same ordinary life they had shared before everything happened. The more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. While continuing his walk, he compared himself to Aoi and reflected on the differences between their personalities. He admitted that both of them shared the bad habit of drinking alcohol whenever they felt emotionally overwhelmed. However, despite that similarity, Aoi was much better at handling difficult situations than he was. She had successfully enrolled in a prestigious university and even worked as a private tutor, proving that she was hardworking and responsible. In contrast, Soichiro considered himself a rather lazy person who was forgetful and not very good at pretending that everything was fine. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard a cheerful voice greeting him from behind with a good morning. The same voice immediately asked whether he was worrying about something once again. Curious, Soichiro turned around and realized that it was Hibiki-kuru. As they continued walking together toward the school, he reflected that she was one of his classmates and also the manager of the school's soccer club. When Hibiki asked if something was bothering him, Soichiro calmly replied that he was completely fine. However, Hibiki immediately pointed out that she knew he was lying because he always practiced weightlifting whenever he was worried about something. Hearing her observation, Soichiro silently thought to himself that she acted like the chairperson of a busybodies committee, even though no such committee actually existed. Ignoring his reaction, Hibiki kindly told him that if something was troubling him, he could always talk to her whenever he wanted. Although Soichiro appreciated her concern, he immediately realized that there was no way he could tell her the truth about the hypnosis light or everything that had happened with Aoi. A little later, Hibiki suddenly became curious and asked whether he had a girlfriend or if he had fallen in love with someone. Hearing such a personal question, Soichiro realized that she had become surprisingly inquisitive. He quickly denied it, explaining that nothing like that was going on in his life. He then asked her the same question in return. Smiling confidently, Hibiki replied that she did not have a boyfriend either, and jokingly remarked that she was simply enjoying the springtime of her youth. Their lighthearted conversation was suddenly interrupted when a car almost hit them while they were walking. The driver immediately stopped the vehicle, stepped out of the car, and angrily began shouting at both of them for not paying attention to the road. Realizing their mistake, Soichiro and Hibiki sincerely apologized to the driver before continuing on their way. After arriving at school, they went into the school restroom to change their clothes. While they were changing, Hibiki reminded Soichiro that he should never practice weightlifting or become distracted while walking in the street because it could easily lead to an accident. Soichiro simply agreed with her advice and admitted that she was right. Since their clothes had become wet during the incident, the two of them decided to dry them before heading to their classes. Their school uniforms had become completely wet after the earlier incident. As they stood waiting for them to dry, Hibiki looked at Soichiro and commented that it was very unlike him to miss the ball, considering how skilled he normally was during practice. Soichiro simply replied that he could not help it because his mind had been occupied with too many thoughts. While looking at Hibiki, he suddenly and unintentionally remarked that she looked very cute. His unexpected compliment immediately caught Hibiki by surprise, and she stared at him in silence. The moment those words left his mouth, Soichiro instantly realized what he had just said and became embarrassed. He silently scolded himself for letting his true thoughts slip out so carelessly. As he looked away, he began wondering whether he would ever truly be able to forget about Aoi and move on from the confusing emotions he had been carrying in his heart. Trying to change the atmosphere, Soichiro suggested that they should do some gym training together. Hibiki agreed without any hesitation, and the two of them began training back together, just as they usually did. After finishing the wholesome back workout, Soichiro apologized to Hibiki for making such a sudden request. He admitted that it had not really been a completely spontaneous decision, and confessed that he would be lying if he claimed he had already forgotten everything concerning Aoi. Hibiki calmly listened to him before reassuring him that there was no need to apologize. She reminded him that they were partners, and that it was perfectly normal for partners to support one another whenever necessary. A little later, she noticed that their uniforms had finally dried, and suggested that they should return to their classes before they became late. Later that evening, Hibiki was sitting quietly inside another room when someone entered. The visitor noticed that she seemed to be in an unusually cheerful mood and asked whether something pleasant had happened. Hibiki simply smiled without revealing the reason and replied that it was a secret. The person who had entered the room was revealed to be Aoi, who worked as Hibiki's private tutor. Aoi then suggested that they should begin their lesson instead of wasting time, and the two of them immediately started their tutoring session together. After finishing the lesson, Aoi returned home. Once again, she ended up drinking a large amount of alcohol before going to bed. The following morning, she woke up with a painful headache because she had drunk far too much the previous night. Feeling thirsty, she was about to grab a glass of water when she suddenly heard Soichiro shouting that he was going to be late for school. By the time she came out, she realized that he had already left the house. Standing there by herself, she quietly reflected that ever since the incident involving the hypnosis light, it had become incredibly difficult for her to speak to him normally. She wished that if only she could be given another opportunity, she would definitely use it to repair the distance that had developed between them. Meanwhile, Soichiro was on his way to school while thinking that nearly a month had already passed since everything had happened between him and Aoi. Looking back, he realized that before he even noticed it, Aoi had stopped drinking alcohol in the living room every evening. Although he considered that a positive change because he no longer needed to worry about her health, he also felt that the emotional distance between them had grown much greater than before. He believed that everything had started because of the hypnosis light. Although the device had given them the chance to spend time together through their PT coaching lessons, it had also made their relationship incredibly awkward after its effects had ended. Deep inside, he wished that somehow they could return to the way they used to be. While he remained lost in these thoughts during class, he failed to pay attention to the teacher's lecture. Noticing his lack of concentration, the teacher suddenly called him out and scolded him in front of the entire class. Hibiki quietly observed the situation without saying anything. After the lesson ended, she walked out of the classroom alongside Soichiro and jokingly remarked that she could understand if someone accidentally called the teacher mother, but it was certainly unusual to mistakenly call the teacher sister. Embarrassed by his mistake, Soichiro apologized and admitted that he had simply lost focus. Hibiki then asked whether something was seriously bothering him. While looking at her, Soichiro quietly realized that, unlike with Aoi, he did not feel awkward around Hibiki at all. Curious about why she had approached him after class, he asked whether she had wanted to speak with him about something else. In response, Hibiki handed him a lunchbox and explained that she had prepared lunch for him herself that morning. She shyly added that she hoped he would enjoy it. Soichiro gratefully accepted the lunch and admitted that he had been in such a hurry that morning that he had forgotten to bring his own lunch from home. He sincerely thanked her for thinking about him. Hibiki smiled and explained that she had originally assumed he would only eat after finishing his club activities, but she was happy that the timing had worked out perfectly. Hearing that, Soichiro jokingly remarked that, if that had been the case, she could have simply given it to him during club practice instead. Hibiki blushed slightly before explaining that she had prepared the lunch specifically for him and that she would have felt too embarrassed to hand it to him in front of everyone else. Her honest answer immediately made Soichiro feel shy as well. After sharing that awkward yet pleasant moment together, the two of them headed toward the restroom, where they once again decided to continue their PT lessons together. The next day, Aoi went to teach her student, Hibiki. Seeing the bright smile on her face, Aoi commented that she looked like she was in a very good mood today. She then playfully teased Hibiki by saying that she had a feeling she must have gotten herself a boyfriend. Hibiki immediately denied it and insisted that it was not the case at all. However, Aoi continued teasing her and said that she was really curious to know who the lucky guy Hibiki was secretly dating. Embarrassed by the question, Hibiki began talking about the person she liked. She explained that he appeared to be a very cold person on the outside, but in reality, he was someone who genuinely cared about other people. She said that he always paid attention to his surroundings and noticed even the smallest details that others usually overlooked. According to her, he also had the ability to understand the loneliness and emptiness that people carried inside them. Hibiki admitted that she could not properly put her feelings into words, but she believed that a boy who truly cared about someone was far better than a guy who only cared about looks and would immediately leave when something difficult happened. Hearing that, Aoi smiled and jokingly remarked that it was especially true when someone got drunk. Hibiki agreed with her and recalled that during their club activities, lunchtime, and even in class, he had acted in such a cute and innocent way that everyone around him had burst into laughter. Aoi then commented that he was someone who was never afraid to reveal his true self and openly show his softer and more genuine side instead of pretending to be someone else. While listening to every word Hibiki was saying, Aoi quietly began recalling everything she had witnessed at the soccer club. One by one, every quality that Hibiki described matched Soichiro almost perfectly. The more Hibiki continued talking, the more Aoi became convinced that the person Hibiki liked might actually be Soichiro. Hibiki then shyly admitted that she had been thinking about asking him to hang out with her the next time they met. However, she also felt that it was probably too early for her to make such a move, so she was still hesitating. As the conversation continued, Ayui became completely lost in her thoughts. She silently wondered whether the person Hibiki liked was really Soichiro, because everything about the description sounded exactly like him. Since both of them also attended the same school, the possibility seemed even more likely. While Aoi remained deep in thought, Hibiki noticed the anxious and troubled expression on her face. Misunderstanding the reason behind it, Hibiki jokingly said that it would be impossible for someone to have multiple boyfriends at the same time. She then complimented Aoi by saying that she was such a mature and beautiful woman that she was sure she must have plenty of boys interested in her. Feeling uncomfortable after hearing those words, Aoi immediately changed the subject and suggested that they should stop chatting and begin studying. Once the lesson was over, Hibiki noticed that Aoi still seemed distracted. She gently asked if something had happened, and told Aoi that if there was anything bothering her, she could always talk about it with her. Hibiki then smiled warmly and jokingly declared that from that day onward, she would become Aoi's personal love counselor whenever she needed advice. After returning home, Aoi continued thinking about everything that had happened during her conversation with Hibiki. She tried to convince herself that she was probably imagining things and overthinking the entire situation. She kept telling herself that the person Hibiki had been describing might not actually be Soichiro after all. Even if it really was him, Aoi sadly thought that Hibiki would probably be the better choice for him if that turned out to be true. While she was still lost in those thoughts, Aoi suddenly realized that Soichiro was on the other side of the bathroom wall. As soon as they became aware of each other's presence, the two of them naturally began talking through the wall. While they were having their conversation, they suddenly realized that their parents had arrived home. Aoi quietly told Soichiro that she would remain where she was until her mother had gone away. Soichiro calmly agreed and told her that it was fine. After waiting there for a little while and trying to pass the time, both of them eventually decided to do their gym session together while waiting for the situation to settle down. Aoi and Soichiro were sitting quietly on the couch together when their mother suddenly noticed how unusually silent both of them were. Finding the atmosphere rather strange, she asked why they had been so quiet ever since she had come home. She then turned toward Aoi and asked whether she had already taken her bath. After that, their mother pointed toward a pile of letters that had been left unattended and told them that, since they were both free, they could help sort them out. She explained that all of the letters had been scattered and left unorganized ever since she and their father had gone on their trip. As Aoi began going through the pile, she suddenly noticed one envelope with her name written on it. The moment she saw it, she started thinking to herself that she often continued using her old family name simply because it was more convenient. She reminded herself that it could not really be helped because many people had already known her by her previous surname before their parents got married again. She also thought about how it was perfectly normal for people to change their family names after getting married, so continuing to use her old name for certain things was not that unusual. While she was still thinking about it, Soichiro, who was sitting beside her, noticed her reaction and casually asked if she was planning to get married. Hearing that question, Aoi immediately became flustered and angrily denied it. She insisted that she was not getting married and did not even have a boyfriend in the first place. Soichiro calmly pointed out that she was the one who had started talking about changing family names because of marriage. Feeling embarrassed, Aoi quickly responded by telling him that he should be the one to get married soon because he had already fallen for someone. She added that, if he did not act soon, he would end up just like her. Soichiro simply replied that she was only saying those kinds of things because she had gotten drunk before. Listening to their strange conversation without understanding the context behind it, their mother looked completely confused. After that, Soichiro calmly told Aoi that it was still far too early for him to even think about getting married. Sometime later, Aoi was sitting beside Soichiro with an apologetic expression on her face. She sincerely apologized to him and promised that she would never do something like that again. Hearing her apology, Soichiro became completely confused. He started wondering whether she was referring to the upper-lower training because she had been the one who had invited him in the first place. He even questioned whether he might have accidentally pushed her too far without realizing it. As he continued thinking about it, he remembered that the very first time they had done a PT lesson, he had been under the influence of the hypnosis light, from her perspective. Meanwhile, Aoi clarified that what she had said before had only been a figure of speech. She then firmly stated that, regardless of everything that had happened, they were not going to do the gym session together ever again. After hearing her words, Soichiro quietly thought to himself that perhaps Aoi was struggling with the same problem that he was facing. On the very next day, a package arrived at the front door, addressed to Soichiro. He received the delivery and noticed that it was a small box. Curious about its contents, he opened it, only to discover that the hypnosis light was inside the package. Soichiro had ordered the hypnosis light for himself, and after finally receiving the package, he quietly kept it in his pocket. As he looked at it, he thought to himself that buying it was nothing more than a gamble. He had no idea whether it would actually work, but he had decided to take the risk anyway. Just as he slipped it into his pocket, someone called out to ask if he was ready to leave. He replied that he was ready, and as he headed out, he began reflecting on how, once every month, their family always gathered for a Korean barbecue party. It had become a family tradition for all of them to visit the grocery store together, buy the ingredients, and later cook everything on the hot plate at home. As he thought about it, he realized that this tradition had started only after Aoi had come to live with them. Although it had seemed like a small thing at first, he believed it had become a wonderful tradition that helped strengthen their family bond. Soon afterward, he arrived at the grocery store with his parents. While they were shopping, his mother noticed that he was looking at his phone and immediately told him to stop staring at it and help his father choose the meat. However, Soichiro casually replied that there was no point because his father was already a master at picking the best meat. Hearing that, his father suddenly asked him whether he had gotten himself a girlfriend. The unexpected question immediately irritated Soichiro. Noticing his reaction, his father simply laughed and told him that he could wait in the car if he wanted. He also mentioned that he was a little worried about Aoi because she had already gone back to the car by herself. Hearing Aoi's name, Soichiro immediately remembered that she often suffered from motion sickness. Without wasting any time, he headed toward the car to check on her. As soon as he reached the car, he asked Aoi whether she was feeling all right. Aoi honestly replied that she was not feeling well. Hearing such a blunt answer, Soichiro sighed and remarked that she could not keep saying no every single day. Aoi responded by saying that it could not be helped because their father had insisted on bringing all of them along. Soichiro replied that this was exactly the kind of family activity that helps strengthen their bond and bring everyone closer together. Hearing his response, Aoi laughed softly before saying that those outings had certainly been fun when they were younger, but now, they had both grown up. She then playfully told him that he was still just a kid. She continued teasing him by pointing out that he was still wearing a school uniform and was still attending compulsory education. Feeling annoyed by her remarks, Soichiro immediately argued back that she was only 3 years older than him and should stop acting as if she were fully grown up. Aoi refused to back down, and before long, the two of them began arguing with each other once again. While they were still in the middle of their argument, their parents returned to the car carrying the groceries. Seeing the two of them bickering, their father asked what they were fighting about this time. Their mother simply smiled awkwardly and commented that sometimes they got along very well, while at other times they constantly argued, adding that watching their relationship made her feel very nervous. After returning home, everyone carried the groceries inside. Aoi and Soichiro immediately went upstairs to their respective rooms, while their mother stayed downstairs to prepare dinner. Before they disappeared upstairs, she reminded them that she and their father would prepare everything and asked them to make sure they came downstairs once dinner was ready. Sitting alone in his room, Soichiro began thinking about everything that had happened recently. He reminded himself that starting from the following month, he would no longer be going to school. As his thoughts shifted toward Aoi, he could not help thinking that she had been acting strangely. She had been the one who approached him first, yet afterward she had suddenly become angry with him. He also thought to himself that she seemed to get drunk all the time, making her behavior even harder to understand. Meanwhile, Aoi was sitting alone in her own room, reflecting on the same incident. She wondered if Soichiro had become genuinely upset with her. She admitted to herself that it was true he was younger than she was, but she still could not understand why she had reacted the way she did. She began blaming herself, thinking that perhaps she had gone too far by calling him such a weird boy. In the end, she quietly concluded that, despite all their arguments, they were actually birds of a feather. While she was still lost in her thoughts, the door to her room suddenly opened, and Soichiro walked inside. Before Aoi could even understand why he was there, Soichiro took out the hypnosis light and activated it in front of her. Caught completely off guard, Aoi stared at him in confusion, unable to understand what he was doing. Soichiro looked at Aoi and told her that the reason he had used the hypnosis light on her was because he wanted to do the PT lessons with her once again. Hearing those words, Aoi silently blamed herself. She thought that she really had hurt his feelings the last time when she refused him, and because of that, she felt guilty. She also realized that the hypnosis light was not actually affecting her at all, but she decided to pretend that it was working. She convinced herself that if she played along with him, it might make him feel better after everything that had happened between them. Without revealing the truth, Aoi acted as though she had been hypnotized, and the two of them quietly began hitting a lower back sesh together once again. After they finished their gym sesh, Soichiro calmly told Aoi that it was already dinner time and that he was going downstairs. After saying that, he left her room and headed downstairs, leaving Aoi alone with her thoughts. Over the next 3 days, the atmosphere between the two of them remained extremely awkward. Neither of them knew how to behave around the other, and the uncomfortable tension continued to grow with each passing day. A few days later, Soichiro went to school, while thinking to himself that he no longer felt like going back home. As he reflected on everything that had happened, he admitted that he had never intended to use the hypnosis light to manipulate Aoi. His real intention had only been to prove to her that the hypnosis light was completely fake. However, instead of exposing it, Aoi had unexpectedly gone along with his act, as though it had really worked. Remembering that moment left him feeling even more conflicted. He then reminded himself that, even though they were not related by blood, Aoi was still a part of his family. He believed that he had already grown up and needed to start acting more sensibly instead of letting his emotions control him. He also realized that his way of thinking had changed compared to the past. Although he admitted to himself that he still adored Aoi, he no longer believed he could continue using the hypnosis light as an excuse to stay close to her. While he was sitting alone with those thoughts, Hibiki suddenly approached him. She gently asked if he was doing all right and explained that she had been worried because he had not come to the club for the past 2 days. Soichiro reassured her that he was perfectly fine and that he was not physically sick or anything like that. He explained that it was not because he no longer wanted to play and he had simply wanted some time alone to sit quietly and think about something. Hearing that, Hibiki softly told him that if he wanted to talk about whatever was bothering him, she would gladly listen. After remaining silent for a moment, Soichiro suddenly asked Hibiki whether she had ever had someone older than herself in her life whom she cared about. He then asked if she thought she could ever fall in love with someone older than her. Hibiki replied that if the person was simply older than her, she believed she could consider it. However, as soon as she answered, she began wondering if Soichiro was actually talking about himself. If that was really the case, she realized that he was probably not talking about her at all, but about someone else. The thought made her heart sink, and she felt that the situation had suddenly become very strange. After remaining quiet for a while, Hibiki gently told Soichiro that she thought he was carrying a deep sense of regret. Hearing those words, Soichiro quietly reflected that perhaps the uncomfortable feeling he had been carrying inside him all this time really was regret. Before he could say anything else, Hibiki suddenly burst into tears. Seeing her crying, Soichiro immediately became worried and asked if she was all right. Unable to keep her feelings hidden any longer, Hibiki finally confessed that she liked him. Through her tears, She told him that he did not have to answer her confession if he did not want to. As Soichiro listened to her, he thought back to Aoi. He realized that he had spent so much time with Aoi by using the hypnosis light as an excuse to remain close to her. However, with Hibiki, there had never been any excuse or deception. Everything about her feelings was completely genuine. Hibiki continued crying as she admitted that she was fine with loving him even if it remained one-sided. She said that as long as she could stay by his side, that alone was enough for her. Hearing those heartfelt words, Soichiro made up his mind. He thought to himself that it was finally time to put an end to the feelings and relationship he had been holding onto with Aoi. He believed that he needed to take full responsibility for the future and sincerely face the feelings Hibiki had confessed to him. After making his decision, Soichiro gently embraced Hibiki. Holding her in his arms, he accepted her confession and told her that he was willing to date her. After embracing Hibiki, Soichiro gently apologized to her. Hibiki immediately shook her head and told him that she did not really care about the apology because she understood the meaning behind everything he had said. Even so, Soichiro admitted that what he had said earlier had actually been more like a psychological test than a serious conversation. Wanting to change the atmosphere, he then suggested that they should have an educational PT lesson together. Hibiki looked at him in surprise and reminded him that they were still at school. However, Soichiro assured her that it would be fine, and after hearing his reassurance, the two of them began hitting back together. Once they had finished, Soichiro told Hibiki that it was time for both of them to head home. Hibiki agreed, and before they parted ways, Soichiro told her that he would call her as soon as he reached home. As he walked home by himself, his thoughts once again drifted toward the hypnosis light. He reminded himself that this time, he had been the one who had used the hypnosis light on Aoi. He then thought that if he simply did not give her any orders for the next 3 days, everything would eventually return to normal. In his mind, that would naturally bring his relationship with Aoi to an end, allowing both of them to move forward with their lives. Believing that this was the right decision, he continued walking until he finally arrived home. As soon as he entered the house, he was surprised to find Aoi already sitting there waiting for him. Confused, he asked why she was sitting there. Instead of answering his question, Aoi quietly looked at him and asked whether he knew a girl named Hibiki. Hearing her mention Hibiki's name, Soichiro was completely shocked. He could not understand how Aoi even knew about Hibiki, and the unexpected question left him completely speechless for a moment. After gathering his thoughts, Soichiro honestly told Aoi that Hibiki was now his girlfriend. He then explained that he believed it was time to clear everything up between them once and for all. He told Aoi that as long as they continued living under the same roof, there needed to be certain boundaries between them. He said that he wanted to put an end to the confusing relationship they had shared until now because he had a girlfriend now. He also told Aoi that she should find a boyfriend of her own so that she would no longer keep teasing him, adding that he believed this was the best solution for both of them. As soon as she heard those words, Aoi's emotions completely overflowed. Tears immediately began streaming down her face as she raised her voice at him. She told him that everything he was saying sounded perfectly logical, yet no matter how hard she tried, she simply could not understand his explanation or accept it. Soichiro calmly replied that she had to understand because it was the only reasonable way forward. However, Aoi stubbornly refused and repeatedly insisted that she could not accept what he was saying. Seeing her reaction, Soichiro gently told her that he understood how she was feeling. He also remarked that she had been drinking quite a lot lately and assumed that something unpleasant must have happened to make her act this way. Aoi immediately denied it and firmly insisted that she was completely sober and had not been drinking at all. Seeing that she had become so emotional, Soichiro softly suggested that she should go to sleep and rest instead of continuing the conversation. However, Aoi refused to listen. Instead, she insisted that the two of them should hit upper back together because she believed it would make her feel better. After seeing how determined she was, Soichiro eventually gave in and quietly agreed to train back with her. After completing the back workout, Soichiro quietly left Aoi's room, while Aoi eventually lay down and went to sleep. As he walked back toward his own room, he thought to himself that perhaps he should wake her up later when he came back to go to bed. However, the moment that thought crossed his mind, he was immediately overwhelmed with guilt. He began blaming himself, thinking that by continuing to care about Aoi in this way, he was betraying Hibiki. The more he thought about it, the more guilty he felt, convincing himself that he was cheating on his girlfriend emotionally. He silently concluded that he needed to do something about himself before his feelings caused even more problems. The following day, after soccer club practice, Soichiro was in the restroom when one of the club members reminded him not to forget to lock the door before leaving. Hearing that, Soichiro remembered the club's usual rule that whoever made the most mistakes during practice had to lock up afterward and also arrive first thing the next morning to prepare everything before practice began. As he reflected on the day's training, he admitted to himself that he had not been focused on club activities at all. His mind had been somewhere else throughout the entire practice, and he knew exactly why. He still needed to have a proper conversation with Aoi, but no matter how much he thought about it, he could not figure out what he was supposed to say to her. While he was still lost in those thoughts, Hibiki came over and happily suggested that they should go home together. Soichiro agreed, But deep inside, he reminded himself that he should not keep worrying about Aoi anymore because the person who was now his girlfriend was Hibiki. After chatting for a while as they walked home together, they eventually reached the intersection where they usually parted ways. Soichiro smiled and told Hibiki that this was where they had to say goodbye for the day, and that he would see her again tomorrow. As he looked around, he quietly reflected that this intersection was the halfway point between their homes. They always walked together until they reached this spot before going their separate ways. Before leaving, Hibiki suddenly told him that she wanted to talk to him the following day. Hearing that, Soichiro thought to himself that he had actually been planning to talk to Aoi instead. However, Hibiki also mentioned that she had something she needed to do until the evening, so their conversation would have to wait until then. A little later, Hibiki invited Soichiro to come to her house. After arriving there, she took him to her room. As soon as he stepped inside, Soichiro looked around and thought that it really felt like a typical girl's room. He could not help comparing it with Aoi's room, which, in his mind, was completely different because it was always filled with bottles of alcohol. After entering the room, Soichiro sat down on Hibiki's bed. As silence filled the room, he became increasingly aware of the pressure and awkwardness building inside him. Sensing the distance between them, Hibiki softly told him that he had not been paying much attention to her lately. She also pointed out that he had not even told her that he liked her, not even once since they had started dating. Looking increasingly worried, she admitted that she could not stop wondering whether he actually liked someone else. Hearing the anxiety in her voice, Soichiro sincerely apologized to her. He then assured Hibiki that he was serious about their relationship and that his feelings toward her were genuine. Even while saying those words, he continued thinking to himself. He began considering whether he should move out of his house altogether. He wondered if his father would allow him to live on his own and realized that, if he did move out, he would probably have to work a part-time job to support himself. Nevertheless, he believed that distancing himself from Aoi might be the only way to move forward. In the end, he firmly decided that, from now on, he needed to focus only on Hibiki, because she had already started feeling as though he had been neglecting and ignoring her. Hibiki and Soichiro decided to perform the PT lesson together. While they were in the middle of training, the door suddenly opened, and Aoi, who was also Hibiki's tutor, entered the house, expecting to begin their usual lesson. As she walked in, she casually announced that it was time to start studying together. However, the moment she stepped into the room, she froze in complete surprise after seeing both Hibiki and Soichiro together. Before Aoi could even say anything else, Hibiki quickly moved closer to Soichiro, held onto him protectively, and boldly declared that she was not going to let anyone else have him. Hearing those words, Aoi immediately responded by admitting that she liked him as well. Caught in the middle of the unexpected situation, Soichiro desperately pleaded with Aoi, asking her to stop because she was already drunk again. Ignoring his request, Aoi confidently declared that he had to choose one of them because, from that moment onward, it had become a competition. She insisted that the only fair way to decide the winner was by having both of them training back together, and whoever won would be the one who got to be with him. Without backing down, Hibiki immediately accepted the challenge and joined the competition as well. Later that evening, after everything had settled down, both Aoi and Hibiki once again stood before Soichiro and demanded that he finally choose between the two of them. Faced with their determination, Soichiro became completely overwhelmed. As he looked at Aoi, memories of the past began flooding into his mind. He reflected that they had been together for such a long time and that he had admired and adored Aoi ever since he was little. For years, he had believed that his love for her would always remain unrequited. His thoughts then shifted toward Hibiki. He remembered how sincere, kind, and caring she had always been toward him. He admitted to himself that he had never met a girl quite like her before and genuinely believed that she would make a wonderful bride in the future. Standing between the two of them, Soichiro slowly looked at both Aoi and Hibiki. After struggling with his emotions, he finally confessed that he simply could not make a decision. Unable to face either of them any longer, he suddenly turned around and ran away. Both Aoi and Hibiki immediately tried to stop him and called out after him, but Soichiro continued running without looking back. A few years later, the story shifted to the future. A little girl happily ran towards Soichiro, calling him dad, and asking if they could sleep together that night. Looking back on everything that had happened in his life, Soichiro quietly reflected that his journey had been filled with countless twists and unexpected turns. Even so, he realized that the three of them were now raising a child together as a family. He acknowledged that many people would naturally have countless questions about how they had reached this point, but he admitted that he could not answer all of those questions right now. Smiling warmly at his daughter, he reminded himself that today was her birthday, and he had promised that every year on her birthday, he would sleep beside her. He also promised himself that he would tell her the story of how everything had first begun, the story of their very first encounter and the beginning of their journey together. Then, someday in the future, when the time was right, he would continue the story and tell her everything that happened afterward.